We are less than 2 weeks away from the election on November 5th, but what will November 6th look like? We are going to maybe know who won. Are there going to be claims of stolen elections? Is there going to be violence in the streets? Today we'll talk about that, as well as Elon Musk's multi-million-dollar giveaway and its potential illegality, as well as some examples of actual illegal activity with get out the vote efforts on the blue side that we never hear about. And finally, we're going to talk about the report laying out the failures of the Secret Service during the assassination attempt on Trump's life. The first of two that have happened in the last couple months. I guess we've all just moved on from that, I guess. All right, let's do it. Welcome to The Homeless Conservative, a show about principled politics for exhausted citizens. I'm your host, Blake Fisher, and I'm a political junkie so that you don't necessarily have to be. Thanks for spending some of your valuable time with me today. As mentioned at the top of the show, we are getting really close to the election. A friend asked me the other day if I was ready for it to be over. And the truth is, I am very ready for it to be over. I just don't feel like there's much that's going to change between now and then. And I could be totally wrong. We could have another attempted assassination level kind of event that happens in the next couple weeks. But so far, it's just been Eminem stumping for Kamala in Detroit and Donald Trump working the fryer at a McDonald's. Sort of your typical political stuff. And the polls are very, very, very tight. Looks like a total toss-up in the 7 swing states, although momentum has gained on Trump's side. He's a little further ahead in the betting odds, which we'll get into some of those numbers in a little bit. I just wanted to say, I was on vacation last week, went to Florida with my family. It was a great time. And then woke up sick Monday morning, just kind of head cold kind of thing. I probably sound a little weird still, so I'm going to try not to cough into the microphone today. I've got a pause button so that I don't have to annoy you with snot and things. Just telling you the real story here. And so I'm going to try to get through this whole show without coughing or snotting into your ears as you're wearing AirPods, doing your laundry or whatever you do while you listen to podcasts. So anyway, I woke up sick Monday and Tuesday and didn't really get a prep for this show. So yesterday I sent out a plea on Instagram where if you're not following, you can follow The Homeless Conservative. That's where I tend to do things like, hey, let's ask questions and I'll answer questions when I don't know what I'm going to talk about, because frankly, this race is kind of boring right now to me. I know that doesn't sound, I don't know. Maybe it should be exciting. I don't know. I just feel like this election cycle has gone, they're too long. We start these election cycles years before, and so there's just a fatigue after a while of it, especially if you're paying attention to it like I am all the time. And so, yeah, I'm ready. I'm ready to know what happens and maybe a little nervous about it. So one of the answers to one of the questions that I got was this one, what does November 6th look like? And I thought that was such a good question, and I have to give props because Soraya is who asked the question is my cousin, so she's one of the smarter people I know, and she has a good question because there are really several ways to think about this question, because we can talk about what is she talking about? Is she talking about who's going to win? Is that what we're talking about? Or is she talking about, will we know on November 6th who won? Or what will happen within the country when Trump is declared the victor or Kamala Harris is declared the victor? Because I don't see a situation where everyone just goes, good game, everyone, and goes back to work. So I really thought there were kind of multiple ways to interpret this question. And so I am going to interpret them all of those different ways. And so let's get to the first version of that question, who wins? Again, it's too close to call. And I'm not really big into predicting who's going to win an election like this because, I'm comfortable making some predictions when they're very obvious. Like, for example, I think that Republicans will win the Senate. I think it's becoming more and more unlikely as each day passes that the Republicans won't win the Senate, because the way the map works out is that Republicans right now hold 49 seats, Democrats hold 51 seats. Joe Manchin in West Virginia has retired, and so that he was a Democrat in an otherwise very, very red state. So that is undoubtedly going to a Republican this time. So that makes it 50-50. So that means Republicans only have to pick up one seat, and the map just happens to work out pretty well for them in the sense that they're not defending any terribly unsafe seats. Most of the Senate map at this point is getting... First of all, there's a funny thing that happens with Senate races where people go, gerrymandering, blah, blah, blah. You can't gerrymander a Senate race. It's not possible because they're statewide. So gerrymandering is when the state legislature, and I know this is just a word that gets thrown out there, and I feel like everyone says it all the time, but gerrymandering is when the state legislatures who get to draw the lines every 10 years, when the census comes out and we reallocate, for example, California lost congressional seats in the 2020 census because they lost population. And so they lost some seats, some other place gained seats. And so we shuffle those around, and the state legislatures get to redraw those district maps. And, throughout the history of the United States Congress and state legislatures, of course they put the thumb on the scale. Democrats draw those lines so that the Republicans, don't win as many, and Republicans do the same thing. And generally how they do that is they draw lines around, for example, if you're going to lose an area, if you're a Republican, you might draw one of the districts or something like that to go around certain areas where minority voters aren't going to be able to be grouped together in one area, and so that they can't potentially swing it for Democrats. But you can't do that in a Senate race because they're statewide races. So there is no gerrymandering in Senate races. But that being said, states are becoming more red and more blue sometimes. So, Oklahoma is an example where I live. Every single county in the last 2 elections went for the Republican. So it's not very likely that a Democratic Senate candidate would ever win in this state. And we see the same thing happening in blue states. And so, but it looks pretty clear that if the Republicans certainly have a shot in Montana, if they pick up that Montana seat and keep all their other seats, then they have the Senate 51-49. So that's likely to happen. Pennsylvania is another area where Republicans could actually win the Senate seat there. It's pretty close. Of course, Democrats are looking at Texas and Florida and thinking they can win there. I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's going to be the same thing that we saw with Ted Cruz 6 years ago, where, he's unlikable. He's not doing as well as he should in Ruby Red, Texas, where Trump's going to win by a significant amount. But I think Cruz is still going to win there. So I think Republicans are going to take the Senate. I'm pretty confident with saying that's going to happen. That's a prediction I'm okay with. But as far as the presidential election goes, this isn't like a football game where everyone wants to do that. Everyone wants this to be ESPN where they tune in to people and they go, okay, what do you think is going to happen? The problem, I think, with political prognostication is that rarely do we ever hold people accountable to what those predictions are. Rarely do we look at someone's track record of did they do a good job? Did they not do a good job? So I think that's important to do. All of that being said, it is very, very close. It's a toss-up for the presidential race. And Trump has gained momentum in the polls the last couple of weeks. Some people have no faith in the polls. I don't blame you. They were wrong in 2016. Although there are some caveats there. I think after the election, I will do an episode. I'm planning on doing an episode with a guy that does polling to really talk about where it was right, where it was wrong. Because we obviously don't know right now if the polls are right or wrong. In 2016 and 2020, all the polls underestimated Trump's support. So even the ones that had Biden leading by a certain number of percentage points, generally when it came time to the actual vote counts, Biden did not win by as big of margins. And so if they've not corrected for that mistake from 2016 and 2020, and Trump is slightly leading in the swing states, then I would say that's indicative of Trump winning. But for all we know, the polls have adjusted for that and they're accurate. All of the polls are within the margin of error right now, which means because they're all less than a point. And I'll get into some of that math in a second. So, but to me, an important thing to look at right now, if you want to, is what are the campaigns doing? Because when we talk about polling, the polling that you and I get to see is New York Times or these other, either newspapers or media organizations, or some of them are just polling organizations that will do public polls, okay? New York Times might spend, a few $1 million on some polling in an election year. The Trump and Kamala Harris campaigns themselves are outspending public polling by hundreds of millions of dollars. They're spending a ton of money on polling. In those swing states, in counties, they're looking at really specific data. So, what we get to see on polling is not nearly as thorough or as detailed as what the campaigns get to see. So if you see campaigns start moving in a direction or going to a state that they weren't planning on going to, that's a sign that they know something that you don't. And we're seeing that happen. You're seeing, generally you're going to have Trump and you got JD Vance. They're probably not going to be in the same state at the same time because they need to be hitting as many places as possible. So JD Vance is doing this somewhere else. Tim Walz is in New York while Kamala Harris is in Texas or whatever. And they're running around the country. But if you start seeing changes in those things, like we saw in 2016, all of a sudden, I think Hillary Clinton decided she needed to go to Michigan, and everyone was like, wait a minute, why is she going to Michigan? She must know something that we don't. And it's because she figured out she was losing Michigan and was kind of too little too late. So it's worth paying attention to what the campaigns are actually doing at this point, more than the polls maybe, because the polls we have, like I said, might not just be as accurate as what they have. But Trump has seen an increase in the last couple weeks. Let's actually look at some of that. So let me share this. If you're listening and not watching, I will talk about all of this. But if you are on Spotify or YouTube, you can just pull up your device and look at this information if you want to as well. So this is Real Clear Politics. They do an average of a lot of different polls. There's several people that do this. There's 538. There's Real Clear Politics. There's Nate Cohen. There's Nate Silver. There's all sorts of people that do this kind of prognosticating. And I like the averages because it's going to account for outliers, okay? Right now in the 7 battleground states, which are Arizona, Nevada, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia, Trump is up in every one of those states. In all but, let's see, in Georgia, he's up 2.5. Every other one is sub 2 points, which is within the margin of error. So he could, like, for example, if right now, if it's like 2016 and 2020, where the polls were underestimating Trump could win every one of these states. I don't think it's very likely that either Trump or Kamala Harris are going to win every one of these 7 battleground states, but it's possible because that's how close it is. That's how little we know about what's going to happen with these polls. So Trump's ahead in all of the swing states right now, and that has changed over the last couple of weeks. This is another chart showing that spread of the vote between the two of them, and it's gone from, since Harris entered the race, it was Trump had basically 48% and Harris had 45%. So that was the biggest gap. Eventually, Kamala Harris went up by about the end of August. That's when she kind of, I would say, peaked. I think that's fair to say. But since October 4th, so the last couple of weeks, essentially, that gap has widened between Trump and Harris in the polls, just in the polls. Doesn't mean that's how it's going to go when the votes start getting counted. So that's where the polls are at. Same thing when you look at national polls. Keep in mind, this is something to know and understand about the electoral system that we have for electing the president, is that when you look at national polls, so we're going to call, let's say, 1,000 people, and we're going to try to get the demographics right, and we're going to try to say, okay, this is representative of America's population as a whole, and that's how polling works. And when it's a national poll, they're just polling people from all over the country, and then they're trying to extrapolate from that how the votes will actually matter in those swing states. The Democrats have a disadvantage right now in the Electoral College because the national popular vote doesn't necessarily line up with the Electoral College, and a lot of people make a big deal out of that and say, oh, it's not democracy. I don't want to get into that right now because our framers designed this system on purpose. This is not an accident. They didn't want it to be purely Democratic. They wanted there to be a little bit of both, because the House of Representatives is purely Democratic in the sense that it is proportional to the population of a state. So California gets a lot more congressmen than Oklahoma does, or Rhode Island, for example. But the Senate, we said, no, that's going to be totally federalist. We're going to have 2 from every state. Doesn't matter how big or small the state is. That's federalism in work. And then the president is a combination of those 2 things. So the presidential election is not all popular or all equitable. It's a combination of those 2 things. And so, like I said, don't want to get into the weeds with it, but essentially Harris needs to have a bigger than about a 3-point lead in the national polls to really be ahead in the Electoral College. That's just kind of how the math works. This is the betting odds right now. They've gone significantly up in the last week. So right now, the Real Clear Politics average for the betting odds. So there's all sorts of betting companies that are doing these sort of betting odds. It has Trump at 61 and Harris at 37.6. Keep in mind, betting odds are not the same thing as polls. Where like if someone had a 61 point, that would be a landslide. That would be like a Ronald Reagan 1984 style landslide victory. This is saying percentage odds. If you flipped a coin 100 times, or if you did this race 100 times, Trump would win 61 of those times. That's how the betting odds work. I think it gets confusing when we talk about betting odds versus the polling, but it's just worth looking at in the sense that it has increased. Same thing when we look at actually the up and down of this on this chart. This is an interesting chart. I'll put this in the show notes too if you want to check it out yourself. Trump's high was when he got nearly assassinated on July, the second week of July. What was it? July 13th, I think is or 12th when the assassination attempt was. I should know that date. That was his highest betting odds. And then it went up to Kamala Harris in mid-August was the betting favorite. It went back to Trump, back to Harris, and now it's pretty wide Trump. It's gone up from, it was, let's see, on October 6th, Trump had a 0.1, it was a 50-50 betting odds essentially. And in the last 2 weeks, it is gone up. So that stuff matters. I'm not going to try to make a prediction here, but it is fun to play with the map and look at what could happen on November 5th. This gets real tricky because there are all sorts of ways this can go. There's really not a way for Kamala Harris to win if she doesn't win Pennsylvania. And I think there's some concern that she won't, from her side, that she won't win Pennsylvania. Because, for example, the Pennsylvania Senate candidate, I think his name's Casey, is that right? Is running ads with like a couple that says, I like Bob Casey because he sided with Trump and he bucked Biden on banning fracking. This is in Pennsylvania, keep in mind. If a Democrat Pennsylvania candidate is running an ad featuring people saying they like him because he sided with Trump and he backed Biden, that indicates very clearly that he has some sort of internal polling that says Trump has an edge in Pennsylvania right now. And for him to win that state, he's got to kind of ditch Biden. And Biden and Harris, I know Biden's not on the ballot, but Biden and Harris are so intricately linked in people's minds. She has not been able to shake him because of her bad questions or bad answers to questions like, what would you have done differently? And her going, I really can't think of a single thing I would have done differently than Joe Biden. That's not helping her. She should have thrown Biden under the bus a long time ago, but she didn't. So this is, okay, so let's look at the map. So this is 2020. And if we start using that map, we can see that Joe Biden won back Pennsylvania after Trump had won it in 2016. If we go to, what the forecast is currently, essentially we talk about the swing states. I can not make this work without, the only way to make it work without her winning Pennsylvania is if she wins Georgia. So if she wins Georgia and Nevada, that is the only way she can win this race without winning Pennsylvania. So I don't see really a situation where this doesn't come down to Pennsylvania and potentially Nevada or Arizona or something. We'll see. It doesn't really matter, but it will seem extremely foolish if she loses Pennsylvania and didn't pick the popular Democratic Pennsylvania governor as a vice president. That just seems like it's going to be really obvious. But to me, there's obviously concern from Democrats in Pennsylvania. There's concern in Georgia. Trump has a higher lead in the polls in Georgia than any of the other states, as mentioned. Trump only lost Georgia by 12,000 votes in 2020. That's not very many. And that's just not a lot. That's not a huge swing that he has to do. So I don't see a lot of, I don't see a clear thing that's going on here, but I do think Democrats are right to be concerned at this point. So I don't know who's going to win, but here are the things that are going to contribute to it as well as what's been going on right now. A lot of people are concerned on the Republican side about the ground game of getting out the vote. Democrats are really good at this. They've been organized at this for a long time. Republicans have not so much. In 2012, under Romney, not under Romney, but during Romney's campaign, there was a lot of blame that went around for the get out the vote effort in that campaign. This year, Donald Trump and his campaign have outsourced the get out the vote to two different PACs. One is Charlie Kirk's Turning Point USA to get out the vote, and another one, Elon Musk's, is it America PAC? I can't remember what the name of it is. But so he's outsourced this. So normally on the Democratic side, a lot of it is volunteers that go knocking on doors, and these are passionate Democratic supporters knocking on doors, trying to get people to register to vote, encouraging people to vote. And Republicans have outsourced this to third parties. And there's definitely been a lot of, I don't want to call it corruption, but there's been people fired already from those get out the vote campaigns for essentially lying about how many doors they knocked on because they get paid per door they knock on. And I think Elon's PAC is something like a ridiculous $30 per door. And so you're encouraged to knock on as many doors as possible, but you're not actually encouraged to, you're not paid anymore to persuade. So there've already been people that were, obfuscating their GPS data so that they could try to lie about it. So they fired several people for doing that kind of stuff. If that is widespread, then the Republicans might have a disadvantage because this election is going to come down to people that are not listening to political podcasts, not people that pay attention to the news. It's probably people that can't even name the three branches of the government. That's who's going to decide this election. When you're talking about in 2020, Georgia was 12,000 votes. In Pennsylvania, it was 80,000 votes. You're talking about a couple 100,000 votes total that won Biden the election. Same thing going back to 2016 for Trump. These are low information voters. Anyone that pays any attention to politics already knows what they think about Donald Trump. They probably already know what they think about Kamala Harris, and they've already made up their minds. There are still a few people apparently that have not made up their minds 2 weeks out from this election, despite it having gone on for forever and despite Donald Trump being around since 2015. They still haven't made up their minds yet, and that's fine. But they're probably low information voters, and they're very hard to predict what they're going to do because if the weather's bad that day, that might be enough to get them to be like, it's not worth going. Or if the line's too long, they might be like, I don't really care. Like, these are not high propensity voters. The upside to Democrats that they have is that their coalition, as they formed over the last decade or so, is more educated. They have generally higher paying jobs. They're more elite. They're a lot of women. These are high propensity voters. They're going to vote in every election. So that's good for them because the people they need to turn out are more likely to turn out. Whereas Republicans are kind of, Trump's essentially game plan right now is to get people to vote that didn't vote or weren't registered to vote already. Those are just harder to get. You've got to get them registered to vote. You've got to get them motivated to get out. And frankly, I don't know that the economy and the border are at the front of people's minds enough to be like, oh, that's definitely motivating me to get out there and vote in this election. So we will see what happens, but I think that it's going to be very close. And that brings to the sort of second part of the question is, will we know who won on November 6th when we wake up? Look, there's no chance that you're going to know who won the election when you go to bed on November 5th for lots of reasons that we'll get into. In 2016, I believe it was 1:35 in the morning when they called Pennsylvania for Trump and like 2:30 in the morning when Hillary conceded. So way past people's bedtime. Of course, I'm up texting my friend Chris and having fun because I love this stuff. But most people went to bed in 2016 without knowing. We certainly went to bed in 2020 without knowing. We didn't know for several days in 2020. So I don't see any way that we'll know on November 6th. And a lot of people freak out about that. They're like, why can't we know who won the election on the night of the election? This seems ridiculous with all the technology and everything. I just want to explain a little bit about how that works because I think it's worth talking about. When you watch CNN or NBC or whatever cable news channel you're watching on election night, they have a team of people that are essentially, they're experts at doing the math on who's going to win. And if you'll notice, they say, we are projecting Donald Trump to win X amount of state. The reason they do that is because they don't actually know yet. There's the certified votes. I mean, there's a couple different parts that happen and every state is different, but essentially there's the vote counting and they turn that kind of stuff in. And obviously that then gets publicized to those news channels. But if you'll notice, they'll call an election with like 30% of the vote in. And that's because they can do the math to figure out, well, there's no way for the other candidate to win this unless he won 90% of the remaining vote, and he's not going to do that in a blue state, et cetera. So they can call these states pretty quickly, sometimes almost immediately after the polls close before they have the numbers, because it's prognosticating. Again, now it's very educated prognosticating, much more than the polls are right now. And so that's why they say we project this person to win. Going back to 2020, you might remember Chris Stirewalt, who was at Fox at the time, called Arizona for Biden, and it was Republicans freaked out about it because and Fox News was even like, "Are you sure we want to do this?" And he was like, "I'm totally sure." And they did it before anyone else did, and they called it, and they were right. And sometimes they get it wrong though. We go back to Florida in 2000. The news channels called Florida for Al Gore before the polls had closed in the panhandle of Florida. That's a bad thing. We don't want that to happen. We don't want anyone calling races before the polls are closed. So they're projecting that that's going to be the winner, but it's pretty normal for these things to take longer because mail-in ballots take a lot longer to count than when people come in and fill out their ballot and scan it right then. You got to think, when I go vote in person, I'm filling out a ballot and then I'm running it through the machine and it counts my vote right then. All that has to happen at the end of the day is that polling center, wherever I go, the church I go to vote, has to give those numbers to the county, I guess. I assume that's how it works. And then the county gives those to the state. And so that all happens pretty quick because I'm doing the work. Every voter is doing their own work. With mail-in ballots, the process is different state to state. But what happened in 2020, specifically in Pennsylvania, is that they weren't allowed to do anything with the ballots that were mailed in until after the polls closed. And so that's why there was this conspiracy among Trump's crowd and MAGA crowd that, wait a minute, we were ahead, and then all of a sudden in the middle of the night, Joe Biden got this huge lead. Well, that's because, they were counting those mail-in ballots through the night. They were counting for 24 hours at a time. And so they slightly changed that in Pennsylvania this time. They can start counting the ballots or processing the ballots at 7 a.m. on election day. So they're going to get a 12-hour head start on what they were doing in 2020, but it still took them several days to do it in 2020. So I don't see how a 12-hour head start. In fact, one of the counties in Pennsylvania, I think it's Chester County, isn't even projecting that they're going to be done counting until late Wednesday, November 6th. And because I think this is going to hinge on Pennsylvania being important, because I think no matter how you do these other things, someone's either going to win or lose by getting Pennsylvania, in my opinion. Like I said, there's only one situation where Donald Trump can win Pennsylvania and still lose. He would have to lose Georgia and Nevada or some sort of combination of that happening. So I don't see how we know. Now, some people are like, well, that's ridiculous. We should be able to count those early. And that kind of goes to the point of the newscasters calling Florida early in 2000. I actually don't like the idea of processing those ballots early, because if those vote counts got out somehow, if some sort of county employee leaked that to the press or to one of the campaigns, I think that would influence people's voting on election day. So I'm actually totally okay with not counting the ballots. It would be kind of nice if we could process them before that day, though. It seems obvious to me that you should be able to, I don't know, this would be an interesting discussion to have, but it does seem like you could, get them out of the envelopes, get them flattened, get them ready to go into the machines before election day. I don't really see why there'd be a huge problem with that. No one's going to be mentally tabulating the votes, when they're just opening envelopes and spreading these ballots out so that they can run them through machines. But I'm not in charge of it, obviously. I would love to be in a situation where we knew and were confident the night of, because I think that the only problem I have with any of this taking longer than the night of the election is that it just allows for conspiracies to rise up. These sort of dumb conspiracy theories that something nefarious happened when those votes jumped for Biden in the middle of the night. If you could look back at every election, and all the mail-in ballots do that at the same time. And at the time, mail-in ballots certainly in 2020 were advantageous to Democrats because Donald Trump was telling people to not use mail-in voting, which is so stupid when a gigantic chunk of your base is old people during a worldwide pandemic where they might not want to get out and risk their life to vote. And you're discouraging them from using mail-in voting. They're not doing that this time. They're trying to encourage people to use it. And so far, some of the anecdotal data from the people who have done early voting or mail-in voting already, we can't know how they voted, but we can know what they're registered to vote in the states that tell us. And there's a lot of Republicans that have voted mail-in. It still leans Democrat. There's still more Democrats that have done early voting or mail-in voting already. But that doesn't mean they necessarily vote for their party either. Just because they're registered Democrat doesn't mean they're going to vote for a Democrat. So there's a lot that can happen, but I just don't see any way that that's going to happen. The other reason, it's not just mail-in ballots, though. The reason we're going to know, there's several states that have automatic recount if the election is within a certain percentage point. So Arizona, Pennsylvania, and Arizona and Pennsylvania both have automatic recounts if the vote discrepancy is 0.5%. That in 2020, Biden only won by 0.3%. So that would trigger an automatic recount in Pennsylvania. Even if we had all the ballots on election night, they're going to do a recount. They can project a winner at that point, but I doubt the news stations would call it for a candidate at that point if it was that close. If it's really within 0.5, they're probably going to say it's too close to call. So that's Arizona and Pennsylvania can both automatically get that. And then you can request a recount. The campaigns can do it or voters can request it in places like Georgia with the same 0.5% threshold. In Michigan, it's an automatic recount with if there's a 2,000 vote, discrepancy between the two candidates. That seems less likely in Michigan. That would be a very, very close race, but it could happen. And then, like Georgia, we had several recounts in 2020. They counted 3 times, I think. They did another processing through the machines as well as hand recounts. 2020, Biden only won by 0.26%. Remember, the threshold is 0.5%. So Biden won by less than half of what that tiny 0.5% winning thing. So I think there will be recounts. In possibly Arizona, possibly in Georgia, possibly in Pennsylvania. And so those take time to do too, when you've got to redo all the machine counts or do some sort of hand count or whatever. So it's going to be very close. We will not know on November 6th, which brings up the third question. Once we actually do know who won this election, what's going to happen? I made the prediction in the spring, I think it was, that there's no way we would get through 2024 without some sort of political violence happening. I just thought the rhetoric was so amped up on both sides with this sort of end of democracy talk. And I'm still seeing that. It's all over the place. It's if you elect Donald Trump, it'll be the end of democracy. He'll cancel elections, et cetera, et cetera. And same thing on the other side. I'm hearing Republicans say she will end democracy. I don't know. They haven't really spelled out exactly how she's going to do it. And I do think both these candidates are threatening to democracy. Trump tried to steal the 2020 election. There is absolutely no way to get around this. He attempted to steal by claiming the election was stolen when he knew it was a lie. And the absolutely ridiculous sort of pressure campaign they put on these election boards to lie and say he won. It was attempting to steal an election, and then obviously January 6th happens, which I absolutely think Trump should be held responsible for because he wanted it. He enjoyed it. He sat there in the White House and watched it on TV and did nothing to stop it. And I think that alone is disqualifying for Trump. And I also think it's very obvious that is a threat to democracy, trying to steal an election. Kamala Harris, though, is not some advocate of democracy. The Democrats would like to get rid of the filibuster in the Senate, which, to be fair, not a constitutional thing, but they want to get rid of the filibuster so they can pass things like a national right to abortion, so they can pass stuff like the Green New Deal or whatever. Like, they want to codify this kind of stuff into law permanently. And they're willing to nuke the filibuster to do so. Obviously, Joe Biden has signed executive order after executive order that he knew was illegal, but decided to do so in either way just to basically get points with his voter base. This is like student loan forgiveness. Pick it. He did this all the time. There's no doubt that Kamala Harris will do the same thing. She has said in the past, and I realize she's trying to run away from it now, that she would, even if Congress wouldn't work with her, she'd find a way to confiscate guns, that she'd find a way to make guns illegal, assault weapons, etc. She'll do whatever. If the Supreme Court then knocks that down later, they claim the Supreme Court is illegitimate. I think claiming the Supreme Court is illegitimate for doing their job when you knew the executive order you signed was illegal, I think that's a threat to democracy. I think that's just as much a threat to democracy when Biden does it or Trump does it or Kamala Harris does it. Doesn't matter to me. When we don't go through the proper process of using Congress to pass laws or budgets or things like that, yeah, I think that's a threat to democracy. So I think Kamala Harris is also a threat to democracy. Although, here's the thing, going back to, I'm pretty confident that Republicans are going to win the Senate. So if Kamala Harris wins the presidency, that's the executive order thing is the only path she's going to have to do illegal stuff, because there's no way Republicans are going to go along with her in Congress, and it would kind of force her to moderate even more than she already allegedly has. Like I said, I don't trust anything she says because I think she's an empty vessel. I don't think that she actually has any ideals. I don't think if she has ideals, they're definitely progressive. She is a San Francisco liberal where she never had to talk to conservatives. She's never had to get elected by because keep in mind, she's never ran a national election or even in a state where it's competitive between red and blue. You only have, your only constituents are liberals and progressives in somewhere like San Francisco or the state of California. So this is her first national race, and she's actually having to moderate a little bit on some of this crazy stuff that she said in 2019. The problem is, it's like, okay, which version of you do I believe? I don't necessarily believe either one of them. I think in 2019, she went even further progressive than she may actually be because she thought that's what she needed to do to win the primary. Didn't work, obviously. And now she's trying to do the same thing, but towards the right, because it's very clear that progressivism has lost over the last few years. You just look at the moderation of people like Kamala Harris, you look at the moderation of some of these Senate candidates and things like that. It's pretty clear that this sort of woke, defund the police, everything's racist, that kind of stuff is not gaining the traction that they thought it is. I think everyone learned the wrong lesson from 2016 and Bernie Sanders almost beating Hillary Clinton. It's just not the case that the reason he almost beat her is because he was so progressive. If that was the reason, then why did none of those candidates win in the primary in 2020? Joe Biden, the sort of moderate, middle of the road Democrats, the one who won in 2020. So I think they learned the wrong lesson, and she's kind of an empty vessel, though. So I don't believe her either. But the problem is, it doesn't really matter what I think about either one of them, because the truth is, if Donald Trump wins, the left will absolutely lose their minds in a way that is not even going to, I don't think, be measurable. And I understand their questions. I understand the question of, like, how could we elect this guy again after he tried to steal an election in 2020? And I think the simple fact of the matter is, those uninformed voters I talked about, they're not paying attention to the stuff Donald Trump says or the threats to democracy. The people that are going to swing this election do not know that 40 of Trump's 44 cabinet members have not supported him in this campaign. His vice president has said he's not fit to be. None of his chiefs of staff have said that he should be president again. They've all been outspoken against him being fit for office. The people that are going to swing this election are not paying attention to that kind of news. That is not trickling down to their Instagram. That's not trickling down to a dinner conversation they're having with someone. They are not aware of that situation. I'm just being totally honest with you. They're not paying attention to it. They're not going to vote because of that. What they're going to vote based on is, do I feel like I was better off when Trump was president, or do I feel better off with Biden as president? And they are chaining Kamala Harris to Joe Biden, unfairly or not. And there's a lot of people that just feel, whether they're right or wrong, or whether the numbers prove it or not, it doesn't matter. They feel they were better off pre-COVID when Trump was president. Is it fair to totally blame Biden for all the economic woes after the pandemic? No. But I think it's absolutely fair to blame him for some of them. I think he has caused inflation to be worse. I think he has, I don't need to get into the reasons why I think Biden has made things worse. It doesn't matter, because the perception is all that matters when it comes to voters. So if that's unfair, that's on Democrats to tell voters why they're wrong about that perception. I just don't think they've done a good enough job at that. So yeah, I think there's going to be violence. I just think that I made this prediction in the spring that there would be political violence by the end of the year. And I was proven right when Donald Trump was nearly assassinated twice. And I wasn't even looking at that kind of violence. I was thinking like the Black Lives Matter riots or January 6th. But I think we will absolutely see whoever loses, that side is going to probably be violent, or at least be kind of insane. I think if Trump loses, he's already laid the groundwork for, this is a stolen election. He did it in 2020. Why would he not do it again? He's never relented from saying the 2020 election was stolen, of which he has no evidence at all, none at all. If he had evidence, if there was evidence of any wrongdoing, why is he not talking about it on the campaign trail all the time? If he had data, if he had witnesses, if he had even one name of someone that voted illegally, he wouldn't do it. So he's going to claim the election was stolen. MAGA is going to buy it hook, line, and sinker. And despite there being zero evidence that, I mean, like I said, I'm predicting that there's going to be no evidence that the election was stolen. Mostly because I think it's pretty impossible to steal a presidential election these days. It's just there's too many counties, over 3,000 counties. I know we're only talking about 7 swing states, but still, the point is he will lie about it no matter what. And his followers will do probably something similar to January 6th. Maybe it won't be the Capitol, but there will be voter intimidation. I promise you, here's a prediction I'm happy to make. If Trump loses, there will be more election workers that win defamation suits in the years to come. In Georgia, the 2 Georgia election workers that have sued several organizations, but Rudy Giuliani specifically, they sued and won. And a judge just said that he has to give up his penthouse in New York and several expensive watches and all sorts of stuff. He can't declare bankruptcy, and they're getting, $150 million from $150 million settlement from him for his lies about them doing nefarious things during the election, which was proven false. It was investigated and they did nothing wrong, and they got death threats and all sorts of awful things. And so good for them. I mean, take him, soak him for all he's worth. I think we will see more of that from the right. I think you will see, county clerks and election workers and people targeted and harassed and potentially even violently attacked. And I think you'll see lawsuits come out of that. And so far, do you know who's gone to jail for election tampering in 2020? It's all Republicans. There's a couple of women in Arizona that have gone to jail for, one lady in Arizona gave access to the voting machines to a third party, someone from Mike Lindell's, the My Pillow Guys organization, let them access the voting machines, which is what their whole conspiracy was about in Georgia and Pennsylvania, was that, Dominion hacked the machines or some sort of thing. And here's the Republican allowing access to the voting machines, which means they had to get new voting machines and all this stuff. So yeah, this lady went to jail for 9 years. They threw the book at her because they were like, you show no remorse. What you did was illegal. And you're still floating these conspiracy theories. And so it's only Republicans that have gone to jail for tampering with the 2020 election. And so we're going to see more of that. On the other side, if Harris loses and Trump wins, like I said, we're going to see a full freak out from the left. I think you'll see sort of Antifa, Black Lives Matter, sort of that kind of chaos potentially. I hope I'm wrong about that. I have seen no de-escalation of this kind of rhetoric that's been going on. And I think we will potentially even see additional assassination attempts. And that concerns me, especially as we'll get to it just a little bit later in the show briefly, because I've rambled on this for too long. The Secret Service is not doing a good job at protecting the people it's supposed to protect. So that concerns me too. Because, neither one of the people that tried to assassinate Trump were, I don't think, they're both mentally not okay, as most assassination attempts are made by people that are not mentally well. It's a lot easier to convince people that are mentally unfit or unwell to do something crazy and violent, but it only takes one person to do something like that. All right, let's get to Elon Musk. Let's get to this next question. So I'm only doing 2 questions on this thing. So let's look at this. So here's the next question that came up. Elon. Okay, so this is the question. Sorry, I'm trying to pull it up so I can read it. Elon paying for petition signatures, which requires people to be registered, indirectly bribing voters, in my opinion. And it feels like a bribe because this petition is for something fairly silly. Is it election interference? This is a good question. This is something that came up this week. Normally something I would say doesn't maybe really matter a ton, but it's interesting at least to talk about. So let's talk about what's going on. So this is that petition that we're talking about here. So Elon Musk has this super PAC, and it's the America PAC, and he's giving out. This is crazy. He's giving out $47. I think he's giving $100 to people I don't really totally understand how this works. If you sign this petition that says you support the First and Second Amendment, the catch is you have to be a registered voter to sign the petition. It's illegal to give someone money to register to vote or to vote. That's plainly illegal. But Elon Musk is giving money to someone for signing a petition. He'll also give in these, by the way, only in the 7 swing states. And in Pennsylvania specifically, he's giving $100 for signing the petition and $100 for referring someone to sign the petition. And you can earn, man, I don't think there's a limit to it. But so yeah, there's all this money that he's giving away. And plus he's giving away $1 million a day to someone in one of these swing states. I don't know how they're drawing these names or whatever. And he's done it so far. I mean, he's given away $4 or $5 million right now. So, so this is this illegal is the question. I've read a few articles about this. I don't want to get into the exact weeds because we'll let the Department of Justice figure out if it's illegal. I'm going to hedge on this saying that it's not illegal though, because if someone tries to sign the petition without being a registered voter, I assume there's something that blocks them from doing so. If they then go register to vote, they don't get the money when they register to vote. They get the money when they come back and sign the petition. Yes, I would say it's a gray area. I would say that it's, I don't know, morally a little bit weird. I don't know that it'll make an actual difference either. I mean, let's just be honest. If you know who Elon Musk is and you know about this thing that he's doing, which he's totally in for Trump, if you haven't heard, you're probably already a Trump supporter. And so this really does nothing to swing. This does nothing to get out the vote. This just spends some of Elon's money, which is fine. If he actually gets people to register to vote because of it, does that mean they're gonna vote? Not necessarily. Does that mean they're gonna vote for Republicans? Not necessarily. I mean, I would think that it's more likely than not. But so I don't even know how big of a deal this is. And I don't know that it's illegal because you'd have to prove that he's paying people to register to vote. And I just don't think that you can do that with this. I think the law's got to be really specific. I think this is a way around the law. But yeah, if you live in one of those 7 swing states, go get $100 from Elon Musk, says me, especially if you're already registered to vote. I mean, why not, right? You could win $1 million. Here's the thing. This is not any more shady, in my opinion, than what the Democrats are doing in plain sight all the time, and no one talks about it. So I'll link to a Wall Street Journal article about this in the show notes if you want to read the whole thing. But essentially, there's been this thing on the right, and by the way, on the right, I mean, like, you've got to kind of dig for it sometimes. But essentially, there are several Democrat organizations who they're 501c3, so they're nonprofits, which means if you donate to them, it's obviously a tax deduction, and then but the rules say that they can't do explicitly partisan things with those, so they can't support Democratic candidates instead of and not Republican candidates, or some sort of, there's all sorts of rules for that. Well, there are several Democratic groups that do get out the vote campaigns, but they're very strategic about who they get out the vote for. So they do things like there's one called Mind the Gap and the New Georgia Project. And Mind the Gap's strategy was they literally said this out loud: the single most effective tactic for reensuring Democratic victories would be a 501c3 voter registration focused on underrepresented groups in the electorate. These groups target young voters, unmarried women, and people of color. So I just want you to, let's just imagine for a second that there was a 501c3 that was going out for trying to find blue collar workers who were gun owners and registering them to vote. Would you think that they were maybe trying to skew it for Republicans? Of course you would. And so I think that there's definitely illegality going on with these sort of get out the vote efforts, especially on the Democratic side, because they're just more organized than the Republicans are. And also here's the other thing. When you've got Biden in the White House and you've got an IRS that has gone after conservative organizations a lot more, especially under Obama, we had some stuff, and under Trump, not under Trump, but like while Trump was president, the IRS was going after Republican and conservative-leaning nonprofits much more often and investigating them. But they're just not investigating these nonprofits. there's shady stuff like this that happens for sure. I would say that the get out the vote effort on Democrats' part is more shady than in Elon Musk's, sorry. Because Elon's just giving away money to say, hey, I want you to sign this petition. And to sign the petition, you have to be registered to vote. And now, to be fair, Elon's PAC is one of the people going door to door. We will see how his PAC actually did. I'm going to bet that they're not as good as Democrats' ground game. I don't think so. So, I don't think this is a huge deal. I do not think that it will matter much, other than some people are going to get $1 million from Elon Musk. Good for them, right? But I wish it didn't happen. I mean, if Democrats try to blame this on their loss, if that happens in November, I think I'd be like, come on. I mean, but again, if we have that close of election, you can blame it on anything and be right, because there's going to be a lot of different factors, and any one of them could swing 10,000 votes or whatever it's going to be in these states. All right, the last thing I want to just briefly talk about, because I think it's important, because as I mentioned at the top of the show, I don't think enough people are paying attention to the fact that Donald Trump was nearly assassinated twice in the last few months. One time by pure, whatever you want to call it, divine intervention, luck, whatever. He turned his head, and that's the only reason Donald Trump is alive, is because he turned his head to look at a chart, and it grazed his ear instead of going through his head. I mean, that's literally, I don't think people understand how close we were to the chaos that would have happened if he was assassinated. I think it would have been very, 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 very bad. And then a second time on the golf course in Florida, Secret Service did see a scope or a rifle poking through the bushes and traded fire with this guy, or not traded fire, fired at him. And then he ran away, and they caught him, and he's being charged with an attempted assassination because he left behind a note that said, I'm going to assassinate the president. Pretty obvious. So 2 assassination attempts. And I'll give the Secret Service credit on the second one a little bit, although, I mean, if the guy's rifle hadn't been sticking out of the bushes, would they have found him? This is the advance team that's like a couple holes in front of Trump. Well, there are several investigations into the first assassination attempt, and I'm sure there will be investigations into the second assassination attempt. But specifically, there was this was a bipartisan panel with 4 people, and they investigated this whole thing, interviewed a lot of people, and basically they released the report this week. It's like a 50-something page report. I want to give you just the highlights of it because I think they're important to talk about, because this is still the Secret Service right now. It's not like this is something that when I talk about election security, if we have a problem like 2000, Florida had all these problems. They had these butterfly ballots, they had these hanging chads, they had all this crazy stuff happen, and then you've got till the next election to fix those systems. When the Secret Service has a failure, first of all, they can't really have a failure, someone's going to die. The Secret Service still is protecting Trump and Biden and Harris and J.D. Vance and Tim Walz and lots of other people right now. So these things really do need to get fixed. They specifically cited 4 key breakdowns in security that day. And these are things that have to change at the Secret Service. And I think it's also worth talking about this stuff because there's still some people that talk about this in a conspiratorial sense, that this was planned or something. There's no evidence of that. It just seems like the normal bureaucratic sort of breakdown and sclerosis that happens. They're just not good at their jobs because the federal government's not good at running a bureaucracy. So first thing that they found was there's a lack of personnel securing the AGR building, which is the building that the shooter was on top of. So despite it being within sight range of where the former president was going to be and the current nominee was going to be, they did not have anyone on top of that roof. And Secret Service, this is also insane, the Secret Service knew of an elevated threat level due to briefings about a foreign government, Iran, their desire to assassinate Trump. So they have an this is the Secret Service's performance with an elevated threat level of a foreign government potentially trying to assassinate Donald Trump. This is not just them on a normal Tuesday. This is with an elevated, credible threat. Okay? Obviously, Iran had nothing to do so far with, there's no evidence that Iran had anything to do with the shooter. But point is, Secret Service not doing their jobs very well. So there's no one on top of that building. The second problem was a failure to directly mitigate line of sight issues from that AGR building. So generally, in an outdoor setting, you would want any line of sight to that candidate that you're protecting to be blocked by something or to have a line of sight to or have people on there so that you can, and snipers, by the way, cannot do all of this job because snipers can't be looking for everything all the time. Snipers are looking past the line of sight of like the immediate area. They're generally looking kind of past that. And so total failure to mitigate the line of sight issues, because obviously there's a building where this guy can get right on top of it and fire at the president or former president. Sorry. 3, communication issues. This is insane to me. No local law enforcement had direct radio communications with the Secret Service. So despite local law enforcement seeing this guy, and we recognized the suspicious activity from this shooter 90 minutes before he opened fire. Actually, 90 minutes before he opened fire. Okay. And they're sending text messages and emails and stuff like that to each other. No radio communication with directly the Secret Service. They offered radios. There was also a problem with communication because apparently there was the First Lady was nearby, and it was actually, they had to change their radio frequencies or whatever the Secret Service did. So there were some problems with that. There was also a failure. There was also a failure of they didn't have the drone. So normally they put up this drone system. It's not a drone system. Sorry. It's not a drone. It's a system that detects drones and can identify when they're in the area, and it can actually pinpoint the location of the operator of that drone. That system was down, and they were troubleshooting it all day. It was supposed to be live starting at 11 a.m. They did not get it up and running till 4:30. In the meantime, while it was down, Crooks, the shooter, flew a drone and surveyed the area from above. So, that's a dumb luck thing. Unfortunately, that system wasn't working. But maybe that's a situation where the Secret Service needs to carry 2 of those systems at all times so that if one goes down, they have a backup. This seems like something that is worth our government. Like our tax dollars could go to, let's get them a second one of those. That seems reasonable to me. So there's that's a little bit of dumb luck that we can fix pretty easily. But then they just had a failure to encounter the shooter. So despite all the communication issues, 9 Secret Service agents were aware of Crook's suspicious behavior, including using a rangefinder to look towards the stage. So this is to see how far the distance is between you and an object. Something you only do if you're going to shoot something or you're golfing, okay? So the only situations I know where people are using rangefinders. So Secret Service was aware that there was a suspicious person that used a rangefinder. Local law enforcement first noticed Crook's suspicious behavior more than 90 minutes before he opened fire. But no one ever followed him. They kept losing sight of him. No one confronted him. These are gigantic problems, obviously. There was also a failure. The actual detail around Trump, so his immediate team that protects him, was never made aware of the suspicious behavior of Crooks. They were just not aware of it. They wouldn't have put him on stage otherwise. So Secret Service members were aware that Crooks was on the roof 2 minutes before shooting began. I can't even understand why they wouldn't immediately take him out. I'm going all the way back to the mid 90s. I think I've told this story before. I'm going to mess up the details of the story. I think I knew someone that, after the Oklahoma City bombing, when President Clinton came to speak, this is a downtown area, friend of a friend sort of thing, lived in some apartments downtown, and thought, well, that would be great. I'll just sit on my balcony and watch it. And no, it was like Secret Service went door to door, law enforcement went door to door and said, hey, your curtains need to be pulled. And if they move, we're going to shoot at you. It was essentially like, don't open your curtains. You can't be on the balcony. That's the kind of thing you have to do in this situation. I think if there's a guy on a roof, I understand how the snipers weren't looking at him at that point if the Secret Service was aware of it. So the point is, this is a complete mess. The Secret Service, they have several recommendations for the Secret Service. I don't want to get into the weeds of those. But the whole agency needs a complete overhaul. Leadership is obviously bad. We're overworking those agents too much. They're expected to, the one thing that came up in the report over and over again is like, those agents are expected to do more with less. That's kind of the mantra, is like, we've got to do everything we can with less. I think we need to give them more resources. Maybe we need someone outside. There's some arguments going on. I was like, should we bring in someone from the outside to run the agency or clean house? Is it better to have someone internally do that? I don't know the answers to that, but like major changes need to happen. And they need to happen fast, because I think that, again, no matter what happens in this election, I think there's potential for more of this kind of violence. Like I said, we've had 2 attempted assassination attempts on Donald Trump in the last few months. I don't see any reason that doesn't increase if he wins. I also don't see it decreasing for Kamala Harris if she wins. I just think that there are enough crazy people out there. We got to take this job really seriously. I don't think we understand, the last president that got assassinated, obviously, is Kennedy. Reagan got shot. It's clear that Reagan's assassination attempt was a crazy person. He was doing it to try to impress actress Jodie Foster. This Hinckley was crazy, okay? But crazy people are influenced by the culture around them, and our culture is very, very high on the violent rhetoric right now. We are calling everyone threats to democracy. It's very clear that the Florida near assassination attempt was kind of one of these lunatic left-winger kind of people that kind of believes all the worst stuff about Donald Trump, and some of it's true and some of it's not, but it doesn't matter because this person's not entirely there. And so the Secret Service, I think, is going to have an even tougher job going forward, because I think this just keeps escalating. So it's something we have to fix. I think it's unfortunate that the media does not seem to be talking that much about this right now, because, frankly, it makes Donald Trump sympathetic. And I think that that's a bad way to frame this story, because it's not just Donald Trump that the Secret Service protects. It protects Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and former presidents and people that have active threats against them, like John Bolton from Iran, and these people that we have credible evidence that foreign governments are trying to assassinate them. And so the Secret Service protects them. And so this isn't just Trump, but the effects of this will ripple throughout. And I just think it's unfortunate that because it's Trump and the media doesn't like Trump and they don't want to like the lens that the media looks through is they say, is this going to help or hurt Trump? And then they run the story if it doesn't help him. It's very clear that that happens. And this is not me trying to be just bashing the media or whatever, but it is clear that this should be a bigger deal than I feel like it's being made out to be. And so I think we've got to fix it. I think it's like priority number 1 right now after the election. I get that in the swing of these last couple weeks of the campaign, it's very hard to clean house in the Secret Service because they're busy protecting 4 different people in 4 different states when they're moving from site to site multiple times a day. I get that this is a very difficult situation right now for them, and it's the hardest it's going to be. But after the election is over, I think it will be time to really talk about this. My concern is that it will not be at front of mind for Congress. It will not be at front of mind for anyone in the Secret Service or elsewhere to really grapple with these problems. And so I worry that because the media goes, yeah, that was a long time ago, or I would bet that most people aren't even aware of the second assassination attempt if you don't pay attention to the news, because it barely made a blip on the radar of the news. And I think that's a major story, that someone was caught with a gun 2 holes ahead of Donald Trump on the golf course. I just think that the news would handle that differently if that was Joe Biden or Kamala Harris. I frankly think that it would get covered differently. And I just think it's very foolish to let your opinions about Donald Trump, because I obviously don't like Trump. I don't think he's qualified to be president again. I think he tried to steal an election. Everyone knows, if you listen to this, my opinions on Donald Trump. But the Secret Service does not just protect Donald Trump. And I just think that it would be an absolute travesty if someone like the president or vice president was assassinated successfully. And we came, that close to it in July. And I think that would have caused, that would have been absolute chaos. I don't want to imagine what the MAGA crowd would have done with that. Just look at the conspiracies that they're throwing out about it. And you can see where they would have gone if it would have been successful. And I just think that's very dangerous on both sides, but especially on the right. And so the Secret Service needs to get their stuff together. And we'll see if they do. All right, that does it for me on this episode of The Homeless Conservative. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really do appreciate you spending some time here. The thing you can do that really helps me out, go to thehomelessconservative.com and sign up for my email list. That just lets me email you if I've got a new video up. I'm trying to do stuff post-election on some more big picture things. Right now in the lead up, I'm just talking about the election, but we're going to talk about more big picture things going forward. big sort of like what should the conservatives do next? What's next for the Republican Party? Obviously, all that depends on who wins in November. And so I'll keep you up to date there. You can also just share this with someone that you think might enjoy it. If you have other politically exhausted friends, send them some of the short content on Instagram or YouTube, or send them one of these episodes. It's a great way to do it. You can also rate and review the podcast if you would like to. That helps me a lot. Thank you so much again for joining me. I will catch you next time.